when we use the word anti-aging or reverse aging, I think we lose people because they feel like it's science fiction. But it's anything but science fiction. So I'm tending to use the phrase decelerate the aging process rather than reverse aging, even though the things we're going to talk about can absolutely reverse certain aspects of aging. But that's kind of the understanding of what aging is today.
That was Dr. Carl Giordano. He is a leading expert in longevity, and he is joining us today on the Me&my Health Up podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Hartcher. I'm a clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. The purpose of this podcast is to enhance and enlighten your well-being. And today we'll be doing that on longevity and what you can do from a diet, exercise, and supplementation point of view to reverse aging. So a bit about Dr. Carl. So Dr. Carl is a double board certified orthopedic and spinal surgeon. He has published 11 publications that have been peer reviewed, and he's also an author of a leading book. He's also been labelled the top doctor through a magazine, the top surgeon. He is an expert in this area of longevity. He is conducting his own research in this area through the Rockefeller University. And I really enjoyed this conversation because Dr. Carl is so down to earth and he explains longevity in a simple way. We dig deep down into signal moleculing and how you can help reverse aging by helping your cells maintain their identity so they don't lose their identity and mutate and you wither away and deteriorate. So join me for this empowering episode with Dr. Carl on Me&my Health Up. Welcome on the Me&my Health Up podcast, Dr. Carl Giordano. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Fantastic. So really grateful to have you on the show. You're obviously an expert in your field and the listeners will really like to hear what you have to say around anti-aging. So really keen to dig deep into the anti-aging. You've got so many credentials, double board certified in orthopedics and spinal surgery. You've published many publications, according to your bio, 11, and you've written a book on shooting to the moon, and that was around your medical journey in medical school. Yes. So really keen for you to share with the listeners how you've arrived at what you're doing today.
Sure. And it is somewhat of a roundabout pathway. You know, my background, as you said, is a medical physician. I practice orthopedic spine surgery, but my background before medical school was a little bit more science-oriented than most physicians. Majored in chemistry, spent some time at the NIH in DC and in America, spent some time at Rockefeller University working with the Nobel laureate, doing a lot of genetic work. And I've never really been able to let go of my nutritional biochemistry background, you know, my metabolic biology background, which isn't really medicine today, you know, and I think there is a gap that has developed between current science and the practice of medicine. And I'm trying to bridge that gap with what we're doing now in this field of health span and lifespan. So the part of the problem today as a practicing physician, you know, we deal with so many patients. There are a lot of pressures. There's a lot of time restraints. And we don't really get a chance to explain to the public as a doctor-patient relationship would allow us to, all of those things that are new and current about health span and lifespan. So this whole project of getting this information out to the public started probably 5 years ago in an attempt to educate initially a lot of my friends that I found to be very smart and successful, but just knew very little about this field. And I found it somewhat horrifying. It's such a valuable, important field. It's not particularly new. The information that we're going to talk about today, some of it's hundreds of years old. Some of it is 10, 20 years old. But you know what I've come to realize is that when real good work is done in a lab, it takes a few years for it to get published. Then it takes a few years for another lab to confirm it and publish it, then another couple of years to get into a medical textbook, and so on and so on. By the time it gets to medical school, let alone the practice of medicine, you're probably about 20 years behind. So in this era of high-speed information transmission, I think this information is too valuable for us to wait 20 years to get this information out into the public. And that's how this whole project started years ago.
I'm so glad you've come on to the Me and My Health Up podcast to enhance and enlighten the well-being of others, to make sure that they get firsthand what's cutting edge in terms of the research around anti-aging. So let's start with that. Let's start with, what is anti-aging?
Yeah. Well, let me even go a little bit farther back. Let me just describe what aging is. And aging can be different things to different people, but in its simplest form, we age because our cells in our body lose their identity. And imagine a brain cell no longer functions as a brain cell, or a skin cell no longer functions as a skin cell. That is basically how you get cognitive decline. That's how you get wrinkles. That is basically the basis of how you age. When your cell can no longer functions the way it should, you start to age. And I get it. We're talking about cells, and some people may be intimidated by the word cell, but cells make up tissues. Tissues make up organs. The skin is the largest organ in your body. So we're talking about the areas in your body that everybody understands: your brain, your heart, your skin, your joints, your ligaments, everything. So everybody needs to understand that the cells lose their identity when the cells lose their correct on-off pattern on a genetic cellular level. So when the brain cell starts making the wrong proteins, it no longer looks like a brain cell. It starts to look like a different cell. So that is basically what aging is today. And everything we're going to talk about today is going to ask yourself the question: how am I maintaining cellular identity through the genetic mechanisms that we understand? And this includes exercise, diet, and this category of signal molecules or messenger molecules, which is the area I really want to get into with the public. But I am happy to talk about diet and exercise first and explain to the public how diet and how exercise also affect these same cellular genetic, pathways. So if I can, I'll just start by describing the genetic pathways that we're talking about. There are 3 specific longevity gene pathways that people may have heard of. One is the sirtuins, very popularized by a professor at Harvard, Sinclair, who has written many articles about NAD and NMN and things like that. We'll get into that. The second genetic pathway is the AMPK pathway, and the third genetic pathway is something called mTOR. So we want to know how diet, exercise, and signal molecules affect those 3 genetic pathways. The other 4 pathways are telomeres, which are the tips of your DNA to help maintain fraying of the DNA, metabolic pathways to maintain your blood sugar, senolytic pathways to eliminate zombie cells or cells that have lost their identity, and then the antioxidant pathways, ways to get rid of the free radicals that can damage our cells, our cell membranes, increase cell permeability, create kind of leaky cells. So the antioxidant pathways is very important. And I know that's a mouthful, but people need to understand this to the same degree that they understand the most important things in their life, whether it's a financial investment decision or what kind of car they're going to buy. These 7 pathways people need to understand. And whenever they have a question where they say, should I do this? Should I do that? They need to ask themselves, am I affecting these 7 pathways? And they will come to the right conclusion. If they have questions about whether they should have a high protein diet or a low protein diet, they can ask themselves, how am I affecting these pathways in a way to maintain cellular identity and decelerate the aging process? I think, when we use the word anti-aging or reverse aging, I think we lose people because they feel like it's science fiction, but it's anything but science fiction. So I'm tending to use the phrase decelerate the aging process rather than reverse aging, even though the things we're going to talk about can absolutely reverse certain aspects of aging. But that's kind of the understanding of what aging is today, and those are the 7 pathways that we need to just ask ourselves when we get into these other topics. What do these other processes do? So if we start with diet, you can ask yourself, how does it affect these pathways? And you almost have to break diet down into what we eat and how we eat, because both of those categories have been shown to be important. Now, diet always gets into this topic of high protein, low protein, keto diet. There's there's 20 different diets. There's overwhelming evidence that the plant-centered diets seem to be the best. You look at all the blue zones around the world, you look at the healthiest people around the world, the people that have lived the longest, they are all largely plant-based. And sometimes these varying diets get criticized by very prominent people because most of the information we have on diets is through epidemiological studies. And the problem with epidemiological studies is they're difficult to make perfect. And one of the prominent physicians that criticizes some of these, questions about which diet is best is his background is mathematics. He's a mathematician as well as a physician. And he doesn't like the fact that we can't definitively mathematically explain why a high protein diet or a low protein diet is better. I do think with time, it's going to become very clear that a plant-centered diet is the best. And it's not high protein or low protein. I think we have to get away from those terms. I think we have to say it's normal protein. We are getting the right amount of protein that our body needs. Whether you should go above and beyond that into the high protein category, I think is wrong because we know the high protein diets upregulate the mTOR genetic pathway, which is not what we want. So the mTOR genetic pathway leads to the recycling of misfolded proteins in our cells. And if you don't recycle them, you create kind of this cellular clutter and you make the efficiency of the cell less and the cells start to struggle and you promote cells losing their identity. And that is true whether you're talking about the brain and cognitive decline, whether you're talking about the skin and wrinkles, whether you're talking about the joints in your body and stiffness and arthritis. It is the same explanation regardless of what cell type you're talking about in your body. So I think my message to the listeners with regards to diet in this category of longevity and health span is if you want to check off every box and do everything right based upon the information that we have, you want to have a largely plant-based diet, which is in itself normal protein and high complex carbohydrates. The complex carbohydrates do not spike your blood sugar and helps another one of those genetic pathways, which is maintaining relatively normal blood sugar levels and avoiding the big spikes. So I'm a big believer in plant-based diets. I've been largely plant-centered for a long, long time. I will never go back to being otherwise. And I think there's overwhelming evidence that it's probably the best diets, not only for the human body, but also for the planet. The second part of the diet is how we eat. They probably have heard a lot about intermittent fasting. And there's a lot of science that indicates intermittent fasting probably is very beneficial. It also seems to promote some of these genetic pathways, again, by maintaining the metabolic pathways of sugar. Other metabolic pathways are benefited by probably intermittent fasting or eating once a day. And I know it kind of is awkward, people. It's social to go out for lunch. It's social to eat breakfast, with your family on weekends, but you do get used to it. And there does seem to be a lot of science that indicates intermittent fasting is beneficial when you look at certain small mammals or mice studies and you treat them with intermittent fasting. There's a lot of information that indicates they live longer and they live healthier. So again, from a mathematical perspective, some people will criticize those studies, but I don't think there's any question that intermittent fasting is probably beneficial. And if you have to err on which side you want to be, we know it's not harmful. So I would recommend that people reconsider their diets from a plant-based, diet as well as intermittent fasting as best they can. So if I get off the diet topic now and I get into the exercise topic, again, like you say to yourself, well, what does it do on those 7 pathways that we talked about? Well, we know that exercise will promote maintaining the length of your telomeres. We know exercise promotes DNA repair. We know exercise promotes antioxidant defense against oxidative stress. We know exercise reduces inflammation. We know exercise improves the immune function. We know exercise improves metabolic health, mitochondrial biogenesis. So we know on a cellular genetic level, exercise is not just something we do because we've heard it's helpful. We know on a cellular genetic level what exercise does. We also know that exercise is important because we lose a certain amount of strength over a certain age. People will hear the words like 3 to 8% of muscle mass per decade over age 30. We know that our VO2 max diminishes as we get older. We know that our balance deteriorates as we get older, and we know we get stiff as we get older. So exercise works on a cellular genetic level. We know we've been able to document it. And I think you have to check off in the category of exercising 4 boxes: strength training, aerobic conditioning, balance, function, and stretching. you can't just pick one anymore. You can't just walk for exercise. You can't just jog or bike for exercise. You've got to check off all those boxes. People have probably heard the phrase, virtue grows stronger from the wound. I mean, that basically is highlighting the idea that exercise is a form of adversity. And when you can subject yourself to adversity, as long as it doesn't hurt your body, you'll basically make yourself stronger on a cellular level. So exercise has a lot of cellular benefits. It's no longer just some vague idea that we should eat right, don't smoke, and exercise. I think we're much more sophisticated in our understanding of what diet does and what exercise does. And I want people to understand that this is all based on a lot of science, and they've got to take it to heart and not just, assume that they're one of the lucky ones, live with this thing we call the optimism bias that it'll never happen to them. They've got grandparents with great genes. My response to that is always, your grandparents grew up in a different environment, stronger ozone layer, less microplastics in the environment, less pollutants. Food base was very different. So they have to understand that today we believe that probably 20% of your life is related to the genes you got from your parents, and 80% is related to how you influence your genes throughout your life. So I know, that's a mouthful in terms of diet and exercise, but I wanted to get through that so we could spend a little bit more time on the new field, which is referred to as signal molecules or messenger molecules. Because that's probably the one area that people probably haven't heard of. But before I get to that, do you have any questions about those two? What did you think about that little summation?
Oh, it's a fantastic summary. You summarized it really well, understandable. And so I have got some questions, and in particular, in relation to protein. You mentioned like the Goldilocks principle, not too much, not too little, just right. So what is that just right? I know the listeners are probably thinking, well, I don't really, I want to eat just right, but what is it?
Yeah. And look, nobody really knows. You will get different numbers of how many grams per kilogram of body weight that you need. I think what we're trying to get across to the listener is that the big protein spike meals, the big cowboy steaks, the big, fish meals, those are the things we're trying to get away from. You want to fill yourself, and I think people will find that a plant-based meal fills them up a little bit faster than a meat-based meal, largely because the complex carbohydrates aren't digested as fast. They don't get these glucose spikes, and they'll probably, feel as though they're losing weight because they're eating less as well. But no one really has the answer to how many milligrams each individual person that should have regarding proteins. I think people have to look at their bodies, see if they feel as though they're losing muscle mass. And if they are, they obviously need to have a little bit more of the protein. People will get used to seeing how their body responds. I think the first thing people will find is that if you're largely plant-based, you will fairly rapidly get down to your recommended body weight. 80% of Americans are considered, way above their recommended body weight. And it is a shame that when you get to your recommended body weight, people seem to look at you like you're sick because they're not used to seeing you thin. So I hate to answer that question because I've seen numbers that are different ends of the spectrum. I don't measure anymore how many grams of protein I eat. I just monitor my body and I see if I feel like I'm losing muscle mass. And I do not feel like I'm losing strength or muscle mass.
Okay, so best to go with strength and muscle mass as the indicator as to whether you're eating enough protein. Just in terms of predominantly plant-based, is that like an 80-20 rule? So 80% or 20, or is it a 90-10, or what is predominantly plant-based?
Yeah. So some people are just entirely plant-based. No fish, meat, no chicken, no red meat. And you can certainly get all the protein you need with plant-based meals. The idea that you have to eat red meat or chicken is just a fallacy today. Yes, you might have to be a little bit more careful to make sure you get all the amino acids that you need, but they are certainly available in plant-based diets. Quinoa is considered a complete protein, just like meat is. Beans are not considered a complete protein unless you add also a grain with them. So I do eat a lot of fermented bean type foods. Beans, seeds, grains fermented in a non-soy type tempeh. So if I have like a tempeh burger, For me, I no longer eat a hamburger. So I have a lot of that in my diet. And I think people will need something structural. I think, you feel like you need to bite into something. And if it's just salads and grains, it's sometimes not satisfying. But I think, how much of it plant-based? Well, I mean, look, you do the best you can. I think Sinclair at Harvard now states he's entirely plant-based. Tom Brady, the football quarterback for the Patriots, and then Tampa Bay, he's been 80% plant-based, 20% food for years. He obviously didn't lose any muscle mass while playing professional football. Arnold Schwarzenegger, bodybuilder, basically states that he is almost entirely plant-based now. So this idea that you have to have a certain percentage of your diet as meat or chicken is just wrong. And I think as more and more people come out and indicate that they have jumped on this bandwagon, the rest of the country, the rest of the world will feel more comfortable also participating in this.
And in terms of intermittent fasting, you spoke about one meal a day. So what have you found through your research the best form of intermittent fasting, or does it depend, like the protein? So how do you do it, and what do you recommend around intermittent fasting?
So when we look at animal models, if you feed the same amount of food to an animal and break it up into two doses, or give them all the same amount of food in one dose, the animal that eats the food once a day lives longer and lives healthier. Now, some people will criticize those studies in saying that the mouse doesn't live as long, so it's not a good comparison to the human being, but we can explain on a cellular level, on a genetic level, what intermittent fasting does. So I have found if I eat once a day, I no longer crave the food. I don't lose weight. My weight has been stable for years. And, although many people will say it takes about 6 weeks for your body to get used to eating once a day, I would tell you it probably took about 3 months to get used to it. And surprisingly, every now and then you still crave eating, twice a day. I don't think there's any harm in doing that. I just think people need to understand what you eat is important and how you eat. If you can eat once a day, that seems to be important as well. And I'm trying to give the listener an idea of how can they check off every box based upon the information that we have today. Not everybody can eat once a day, but your body needs a constant supply of glucose. And when you eat, everything you eat essentially is broken down into glucose. And then if you eat just once a day, your liver goes through a process called gluconeogenesis, where it starts to supply glucose by breaking down the glycogen in the liver. So your risk of having liver issues by eating once a day is also dramatically dropped. So eating once a day is certainly, in my mind, the right thing to do if you can do it. And it's not, and I get it, it's not terribly easy, and it's not terribly social when people are going out to lunch and, you're going out to dinner. Look, and I will tell you, I'm not a complete fanatic about it. If I go out to dinner, I'll eat whatever's on the menu. I'm not going to ruin everybody's meal by saying there's nothing on the menu that I like. But we have, certainly transition to eating more at home and less outdoors. But, we do the best we can. And I think people need to be armed with the information, and they will have to choose how they want to live and how much of this they want to participate in.
Yeah, no, really important. So thanks for sharing that,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Carl. In terms of the timing when you have that one meal, when do you recommend the best time of the day to have that one meal?
So for me, I have kind of gotten into a groove of eating around 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, maybe 6 o'clock. I will tell you, once you get used to it, I could probably eat at 7 o'clock and not crave it too much. I mean, I want to eat with the family. I'm not sure my kids are going to be doing what I do. And if I eat too early, I won't be eating with them. So I'll adjust to them. But I think everybody has to pick that time based upon their own body metabolism as to what works for them. And I also recognize, like, if you're playing a sport, you might need to eat twice a day. If you have other energy needs, you may need to eat a little bit more than that. I found recently, like, if I'm going to play golf and I'm walking 18 holes and it's hot, I'll feel like a little fatigued. So I will eat something, not a big meal, but something. But I think the point is you do the best you can. And no one will be perfect with this, nor do I think you need to be perfect with this. I think the body is fairly resilient, and the body will, adapt as best it can. But if we can at least prompt it in the right direction based upon what we know on the cellular mechanisms, I think that's the goal.
And I'm getting to that question, Dr. Carl. In terms of the next one was around exercise. You mentioned the 4 types of exercise, and we need to be doing those 4 types of exercise. Is there a particular split that you found that gives better benefits, or is it depend on the person?
Yeah, look, I think when it comes to exercise, people need to understand you got to check off all four boxes. And I try and do it every day. I get on the treadmill every day. I run 2 miles every day. And I think that's what I do for my aerobic conditioning. And that's a good physiologic exercise. I found for me, it's more exercise than biking. But if you want to bike, but I think you've got to bike hard. You've got to have a constant high, aerobic demand when you're biking or you're on an org and you're rowing or you're running. You've got to do something really aerobic. I also will do the strength training. I don't miss it almost every day. I will do some form of strength training with weights and squats. I'll work my arms, I'll work my legs. Every day I work on balance. I watch all the professional athletes. And if you're a golfer, you see all of these guys doing single leg stance, dipping down on one leg. They're working on their balance. They can almost replicate the entire golf swing on one leg. And those are the things that we all need to do. People need to realize that our balance function deteriorates with age. There's a lot of articles and publications that people break their hip as they get older because they forget how to fall. They lose their balance. They become uncoordinated. So people need to jump on that bandwagon and work on their balance if they want to do everything right based upon the information that we have. And stretching. You can't ignore the stretching. You've got to get on the floor. You've got to do all your poses. It doesn't take long. Everything I'm just describing, I will do in probably 35 minutes a day. It doesn't take that long, so I don't think you can pick and choose them anymore today. There's so much information that's valuable that indicates these are the things we have to do. We know there are so many metabolic and cellular benefits to doing it this way.
So a little bit of each every day is what you recommend.
Yeah, it becomes easy after a while. And I think people may have to start slow and they will build themselves up and get themselves back to the way they were when they were in their late 20s. And that's the goal, to prolong your life at that level for as long as you can. And I don't care at what age people start. It's been shown that at any age, if you check off all these boxes, you will indeed benefit. Now, look, I see patients that unfortunately have a lot of medical issues, especially orthopedic issues. And it's a shame because when there's actual deformation of the joints or the spine or deterioration to that degree, sometimes it is very difficult. And I think people need to understand they need to start this at a young enough age so that they don't get to that end stage. People also need to understand that we are considered to start aging probably in our late 20s. That's when we start to age. So at what point do we start doing all this? The sooner the better.
Fantastic. Now, onto your favorite subject, signal molecules. What are they? And tell us all about them.
So basically, signal molecules is a category that's not new. It's been out there for probably 20 years. And the people that have done all the basic research have done so over the course of years. And I think people need to understand that this field has been very incremental. People handed off their information to the next scientist, to the next scientist, to the next scientist, and that we've gotten to where we are now. So I don't think anybody really can claim to own this information. And what I want people to understand, like if you break down health into the individual components of cellular health, you can start to understand what you need to do on an incremental benefit basis to nudge your cells in the right direction to decelerate aging and promote health span. And look, before we even get into the individual molecules, I get it. We're talking about small, minor tweaks and changes where they feel relatively insignificant at the time. But what people need to understand is over time, they make a difference. It's this type of incremental gain throughout life where all of the benefits are really going to be seen. And the hard part is it's hard to measure. So people feel like, I don't feel any difference. I'm not sure I'm going to continue with this. And that's the wrong idea. That gets us into that category called the optimism bias. I'm going to be okay. It doesn't happen to me. I can't measure the benefits. So I'm going to go along with smoking or drinking, or I'll exercise in a few years. I won't start now. So, we put together, we found the top 5 molecules that have almost hundreds of articles published on each of them. Some of them date back to usage over 1,000 years. We combined them all into one tablet. Now you have to take 6 tablets a day because you need a certain milligram dose of each of these to see the benefits that we're looking at. And the dosages are fairly well described in the literature as to how much of it you need. Some of them are not as absorbed as we would like, but I'll go through them one by one. So the first one that we'll talk about is called berberine. Berberine is a hypoglycemic. People hear a lot today about hypoglycemia, weight reduction, things like that. And although there's a vanity side to that, I want everybody to understand there's an actual health benefit to that. There's a study going on at at Einstein in New York today, a medical school, called the TAME study, where they're looking at hypoglycemics to extend life and decrease or at least maintain cellular function to decrease the whole aging process. So berberine works not only on that metabolic pathway of maintaining blood sugar, it also activates the sirtuins. It activates AMPK, it downregulates mTOR, which is exactly what we want. It's also an anti-inflammatory and an antioxidant. So a lot of benefits to taking berberine on a daily basis, and I don't think there's any reason for people to avoid it. The second one is resveratrol, which people may have heard of. Resveratrol is that one molecule that's found in red wine that's felt to be associated with why the French population have this paradoxical longer lifespan despite a diet that's high in fat and despite a high smoking history. But resveratrol at certain doses has been shown to be a very potent sirtuin activator, a very potent AMPK activator, a very potent downregulator of mTOR. Again, it also maintains blood sugar. And again, it's also a very powerful antioxidant and anti-inflammatory. So again, we're checking off all the boxes in those 7 pathways as best we can. The third molecule is called quercetin. Quercetin, also a very potent sirtuin activator. Now, quercetin also gets you into that senolytic pathway. It helps to eliminate those zombie-like cells or cells that have already lost their identity. And the benefits of quercetin are found to be most effective when the senolytic cells are just starting to accumulate. So you don't want to wait until you're old and wrinkly. You want to get on these while you're, relatively young. Nobody really knows what age you should start, but we all recognize now probably sooner is better than later. Quercetin is also an antioxidant and an anti-inflammatory. So again, we've checked off a number of boxes on our 7 pathways. The next one is NMN, which is very popular today, again, popularized by Sinclair at Harvard, because it is, again, a very potent sirtuin activator. And that sirtuin pathway is key because the sirtuins increase your NAD levels. And our NAD levels drop almost 50% as we get older. And the NAD level is important to maintaining cellular identity as well as maintaining our cellular repair mechanisms at the level of the DNA. So we always have error rates in our DNA, and we have a repair mechanism built into every cell in our body. And when the error rate starts to exceed the repair rate, you start to age. You start to lose cellular identity. So I'm a big believer that NMN is a very important component to this. The 5th component of the signal molecule category is astragalus. It works to help maintain the length of your telomeres. So astragalus has been shown to stimulate an enzyme called telomerase that helps maintain the length of the tips of your DNA, called the telomere, that helps the DNA from being recognized as a damaged piece of DNA. So those are the categories that we want to check off. I don't think people should pick and choose one. You can't just pick and choose NMN. You can't just pick and choose resveratrol. You can't just pick and choose berberine. You want to check off all of these. That's what science is telling us to do in the category of the signal molecules. So it's a lot of information, I know, but that's the field that interests me the most, especially since I enjoy the field of nutritional biochemistry and more of a mechanistic biology approach to medicine rather than just the traditional form of medicine. And I think this information will become standard medical information in 20 years, but I think it's too valuable for it not to be introduced now. And that's why we put a website together to explain all this. And the product actually was a late addition to the website because we realized it's a little hard to get all of these components at the right doses. And I will tell the listeners that almost all of these are fat soluble. If you take these with a glass of water, you're probably not going to absorb. You have to take these with a fatty substance, food, olive oil, or yogurt. Just like vitamin D is fat soluble. If you're taking vitamin D with water, you're probably not absorbing it. So that's where we are today with the science of today. And I think that brings up the listeners up to date with regards to diet, with regards to signal molecules, with regards to exercise.
And your formula, in terms of, obviously you have all these ingredients in a single capsule or a couple of capsules. So you've worked out what's optimal in terms of what the signal molecule needs in terms of staying, maintaining its identity. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, I think as time goes on, we may tweak this as more publications and science comes out. But what people may look at our formula and say, well, that's a high dose, 1,000 milligrams of quercetin or 1,500 milligrams of astragalus. What they don't realize is underdosing is basically like no dose at all. Some of these are not fully absorbed. And you need a certain dose so you can get enough of this in your blood. Some people may say, well, we know this component is not absorbed to a great degree. That's true, but it is metabolized and the metabolites are absorbed, and we know that the benefits are there through the metabolites. So when people say, oh, that's not absorbed, that's old information. We've gotten past that. We understand that some of these are not absorbed to a great degree, but the metabolites are absorbed and the benefits are come through the metabolites. But yeah, you need a certain dosage. And there are a lot of publications that indicate what that dose should be. And, the number of tablets today to get all of this in your system tends to be about 6 tablets a day. And I take them either all at once in the morning if I know my day is busy, or I will take 3 in the morning and 3 in the evening. And in the morning, I'll honestly take it with a little olive oil or yogurt. Your listeners may have heard that Starbucks is coming out with a coffee drink that they call oleata. So it sounds like Schultz went to Sicily and saw that they serve olive oil in their coffee, and he is now coming out with that drink at Starbucks. So I actually put a little olive oil in my coffee, whip it up with my little whisper, and it gets emulsified, and I take my tablets that way. But I don't really eat breakfast, so that's the way I get my tablets in the morning.
Yeah, I was going to ask that because you mentioned, you're having the tablets in the morning and then, saying that you need to have them with something fat soluble. And you answered that question. So thank you. Really appreciate it. So how can the listeners best connect with you? How can they find your products? Please share.
So I have a website called rebesana.com, REBESANA. And on that website, there's a resource section that's just full of articles about each of these individual components and what the signal molecules do on a genetic level. So if they go to Rebesana and they can go to that resource section, they get a lot of information. There's also a bibliography that has about 150 scientific articles that have been published by scientists around the world that I think they'll find very useful if they really want to get into the science. That's probably the best way. There's also a contact me section on the website. I get about 20 questions emailed a day, and I still enjoy answering them. I will tell you, in America, most of those questions come from California, the West Coast. I think they're a little bit more ahead of the East Coast in terms of being interested in this topic. But that's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me and to learn more about my product.
Fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on, Dr. Karl, and sharing your insight with the listeners well ahead of it being, well versed into the medical system. So it's great that you're giving them a heads up as to what they can do rather than wait 20 years. I mean, 20 years is 20 years of aging, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think they have to understand that every day makes a difference. And at any age, you can benefit from this. It's not random. There's a reason why we see so many issues out there today with regards to health. And I think people need to understand that they are nudging their bodies in one way or another. And I would hope as a physician, they would learn to nudge them in the right direction.
Fantastic. Thanks for those concluding words. And also, thank you so much for covering off that it's something that's hard to measure. And you may not notice a physical difference from day to day, but in 10 years, 20 years, that's when you're really going to notice a difference from, looking after your body in terms of anti-aging and doing all these, great things you mentioned around diet, exercise, and supplements. So I really appreciate your time, Dr. Karl. It was very insightful, and I'm sure the listeners got some great insight.
Great. No, I appreciate it. And I hope that they find it valuable. And I appreciate your platform because this is a very important valuable platform for the listeners to get a chance to hear this type of information.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Podcast disclaimer. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare, or professional advice and are provided for general information purposes only. All care is taken in the preparation of the information in this podcast. Connected Wellness Proprietary Limited, operating under the brand me&my Health Up, does not make any representations or give any warranties about its accuracy, reliability, completeness, or suitability for any particular purpose. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it are not to be used as a substitute for professional, medical, psychological, psychiatric, or any other mental health care or healthcare in general. me&my Health Up recommends you seek the advice of a doctor or qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Inform your doctor of any changes that you may to your lifestyle and discuss these with your doctor. Do not disregard medical advice or delay visiting a medical professional because of something you hear in this podcast. This podcast has been carefully prepared on the basis of current information. Changes in circumstances after publication may affect the accuracy of this information. To the maximum extent permitted by the law, me&my Health Up disclaims any such representations or warranties to the completeness, accuracy, merchantability, or fitness for purpose of this podcast and will not be liable for any expenses, losses, damages incurred, indirect or consequential damages or costs that may be incurred as a result of the information being inaccurate or incomplete in any way and for any reason. No part of this podcast can be reproduced, redistributed, published, copied, or duplicated in a form without prior permission of me&my Health Up.